Hey, hockey fans, welcome to the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast. I'm your host, Gino Retta. There are so many great players who played the game of hockey over the past few decades, players who made an impact not only on their teammates and fans, but to the sport of the hockey itself. The 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast takes great pride in catching up with some of these players, sharing their great stories, and finding out what they're up to today. On this week's show, we're joined by a Toronto Maple Leaf legend who played 15 years in the NHL, was a Team Canada hero in the first ever Canada Cup, holds the NHL record for most points in a single game, and was elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame in 1989. We're talking about Darryl Sittler. Darryl, welcome to the show. Great to have you with you, my friend.
Thank you. It's always good to see you, Gino. We've been around for a long time, you and I.
We have been around for a long time. And I need to share a story with you, something that just happened last week when I know you and Borje Salming are very, very close. And just as background to our listeners, Borje was diagnosed with ALS this past summer, and the disease has progressed very, very quickly. We recently did a feature on him from back in Sweden, where he's actually having a hard time communicating now, and was recently traveling through Toronto to come and see some friends and to share some moments with them. And Darryl, you were with him at center ice last week, and I was up live on That's Hockey, and we said, there's a great moment going on right now at center ice. Let's get to it. And it was a video live shot of you standing beside Borje, and you were in tears, and I lost it. I got to be honest with you, my friend, I lost it on the air. Take me back to that moment and what that was like for you.
Well, I think you and everybody who watched it was touched by it. It's a moment in my life and a moment in those people's lives who watched it that they'll remember forever. Those moments don't come around very often, but when they do, they're precious. I'll take you back a little bit before that night. Borje contacted me back in early July, very emotional Zoom call we had where he and Pia explained that he was just diagnosed with ALS. And we all know Lou Gehrig's disease, what the outcome is, and the battle that both the patient and the family go through as it digresses. So keeping in touch with Borje throughout the summer, Zoom calls, introduced him to a teammate of ours, Mark Curtin, who has been battling ALS for the last 5-6 years. In Mark's case, it started in his limbs and is slowly moving to other areas of his body. But Mark was very instrumental and helpful with Borje and his family in getting through the last few months, dealing with doctors, helping him with suggestions for whether it's breathing or clearing his throat or whatever it is that Mark knew that Borje's family will be facing. He helped him. So he's been a wonderful support. Mark was there on Saturday's game. But that evening on Friday night, Borje had said to me, we met him in Montreal. He came in for the possibility of getting on a trial drug in September. And he was in tough shape then. He was having difficulty swallowing, difficulty speaking. But he did say to me, he says, Darryl, I'm going to be there on Hall of Fame weekend. And I knew just by seeing his condition that would be a long shot, keeping in touch with him. But I got in touch with Brendan Shanahan from the Leaf organization and said, Borje would really like to come on Hall of Fame weekend. So they set it all up. He could bring family members. All 6 of his children were there. A couple other family members, their spouses. So we didn't know whether it was going to happen until about a day and a half before they got on the plane to be here, because that's, the seriousness and where he was with his illness. So the fact that he arrived was unbelievable for me as a teammate and a friend. And when I met him down before the ceremonies, obviously it was a very emotional time. Tiger Williams was with me, Lanny McDonald. And then they asked if I would walk out on the ice with Borje. And hey, it was very touching. I remember Borje holding on to me and by my hand and going by the players' bench and seeing the serious, somber looks on each one of those players as we went by. And as we went by, I thought to myself, hey, that was Borje, that was me 40 years ago. But it was so touching to get out on the ice there, to do the introductions. Now, people ask me if Borje knew what was going on. He knows what's going on. I know his facial expressions might show something different, but he was very, very well aware of everything. He wanted to be there. The fact that he got there shows you the character and the man and the toughness he is as a person. It was a tough flight over here, and obviously medical staff, and he's being fed through a feeding tube. So there's all these different complications that come with this travel. And I knew all that. So when the tears started to come, it was a magical moment that it's happened. I know Borje wanted to show his appreciation to the Leaf organization and the fans that supported him for so many years and loved him, and vice versa. Even though there's probably a lot of people in the crowd there that never watched Borje play, they certainly got a sense of what he meant to not only the Leaf fans, but to the National Hockey League. And it's a moment I'll always cherish and remember, as well as anybody who watched it, like yourself, Gino. So the next night, Borje's family went on the ice. It was kind of a perfect weekend for us that we had games back to back, because the Hall of Fame obviously is a special evening. And Borje has been to that Hall of Fame game many times, and we've played in those Legends games together, and it was always fun to get back together. So I think that's why he wanted to be there in such a bad way. But Saturday night again was a very emotional night. And when I say that, knowing our team and the season's ticket holders, there was probably another half or 3/4 new crowd that wasn't there on the Friday night. So it's nice that everybody could share that experiences on both nights who were there. So on the Monday evening, Borje he wasn't in any good shape to go to the NHL or the Alumni Awards, the Hall of Fame. He wanted to, but he had a little fall the night before, and so we got a private room. Tiger and his wife and my wife and Borje's family, Jimmy McKenney, came with Christine, and we were all there. And Borje was really engaged and in tune watching it.
Awesome.
Had many tears on his eyes as Lanny introduced him to say that he was watching it. Alfredson got on and talked about him, as did a couple of the other Swedes. So it was a magical weekend. The fact that 3 Swedes were inducted, Mats was there, and everything else, you couldn't have written the script any better.
It's so hard to watch. I mean, you were in the room with him for years. What, 8 years? I think you guys played together with the Leafs. I covered him as a young reporter back then in your early playing days and stuff. And walking into that room and seeing when he gets changed, the guy was just chiseled, probably one of the most physically fit NHLers I've ever seen. And then his skill level on the ice, the things he could do, the way he could control the play. I mean, you mentioned there's a lot of people that haven't had the opportunity to see Borje Salming play. But for those who maybe never saw him, I mean, it's easy for me to talk about him because, I'm a broadcaster. That's my job. But you're a teammate. You were one of the all-time greats yourself. Tell our audience how great this man actually was on the ice during his playing days.
Well, when Borje came over as a 23-year-old, he and I are 6 months apart in age, and they were the first 2 Swedes, he and Inge Hammerström. And I think there was a little bit more attention on Inge than there was on Borje. Inge was a little bit older, but Borje just grew on us. First of all, their level of conditioning was beyond anything that any of our teammates had at that time. So they were well ahead of the game there. And you learn quite quickly, watching him in practice and then watching him in the games, that his mental toughness and his compete level and his just wanting to play every shift as hard as he could was there, whether it was practice or not. And then as the season started and other teams saw that, hey, this guy's pretty good out there, and he logged a lot of ice time, he became a physical target of a lot of teams. In the 70s, you could get away with that. The Donnybrook Brawls, the sucker punches behind the scene, all those sorts of things. Borje would come off the ice after some games. You'd in the dressing room, in the shower, and you'd look at his body, and he had all these scars and welts, all over him. Guys spearing him and pulling their stick against him. But that didn't deter him from the way he played. He was one of the best shot blockers as a defenseman. And as a forward that played with him, he had that peripheral vision that if you were in an open spot, somehow he could find you and see you and put it on your stick. he never won the Norris Trophy. I played against all those guys who won it in my era. They were all great players. Borje could have won it as well as they did. They were on Stanley Cup teams, so obviously there's a little bit of different recognition that comes with that. But I think each player who won that Norris Trophy can stand up and say, "Hey, Borje Salming was, he was on the All-Star team, I think 6 times, first All-Star team a few times." So it's a fine line, and he played a long career. When they showed that video of his career, obviously the standing ovation he got in the Canada Cup in Maple Leaf Gardens was a goosebump feeling for all players that watched that, and for fans that gave him that ovation. And then when he had that 100 some stitches,
do you
down
remember
his
that?
face,
That was awful.
Yeah.
I mean, you were talking about the damage the body's taken. Like, if you're listening to this or watching this podcast, you need to Google Borje Salming face cut, because what was like 120 stitches he took from that skate across the face.
Just happened to miss his eye, come down through here in his face. And that was an awful feeling. But when you talk about him being chiseled, hey, I was with Borje a year ago, and there wasn't a doubt in my mind that this guy was going to live till he was 90, 95. His mother's still alive at 96 up in the northern part of Sweden. So that's what we all thought. Obviously, ALS is a nasty, devastating disease. Why people get it, nobody knows. I know Borje's had 6 concussions in his career. Mark Curtin had 3. There's 50 ex-NFL players who have ALS. So it might have something to do with brain injury, brain damage, or whatever, but it's a nasty, nasty disease. And unfortunately, like when we talk about Lou Gehrig's disease, that's 80 some years ago, whatever it is, and they still haven't been able to find a cure. They're getting closer, and we're going to do everything we can for Borje and Mark Curtin and those other people and families with ALS to try to make a difference moving forward, for sure.
Good for you. The foundation is now raising awareness and funds, so that's a good thing. You mentioned the Canada Cup. Borje obviously was hugely involved in international hockey, and I want to ask you about that 1976 Canada Cup, because it's been a long debate amongst all of us in the sports industry. Was that the single greatest gathering of Canadian talent on a Team Canada in history? We called it the Dream Team. We called it the greatest roster ever. I understand the 72 Summit Series drew great attention because it was Canada, Russia, and the first time that ever happened. But in terms of talent on a single team, I mean, the guys you had Bobby Clark, Guy Lafleur, Larry Robinson, Bobby Hull, Marcel Dion, Phil Esposito. Was that, in your opinion, objectively, because you were a part of it, the single greatest gathering of a Team Canada in history?
Well, in my opinion, if you look at the careers you're talking about, Bobby Orr, he played in that series. He was on the first All-Star team. Borje was on the first All-Star team next to Bobby Orr. So it tells you, in comparison, when the greatest players in the world are playing in a tournament like that. But 19 players off that hockey club are inducted into the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Yourself included.
What happens, like anything, the farther you get away from it, there's new people come in and there's a debate on everything. And the players are great today, as was the 87 Canada Cup team who won, and Mario scored the goal. But that team, to me, was as good as it gets. There was a culmination of younger guys like Denny Potvin, Marcel Dion coming into the league. And then on the other end, there was Esposito and Bobby Orr and a number of great players like that, Rogie Vachon. So I say it was one of the best teams ever Canada assembled together. And, when you look at the other teams, like the Stasnys they were young, they were on the Czech team. A lot of those great Russian players, it was communist at the time. And a few years later, when it changed over, those guys got out of the country and had fantastic careers in the National Hockey League. So that 76 series was full of great players from around the world.
You mentioned the Czech team. Back then it was still Czechoslovakia, the team that you played in the final. A rather dramatic finish for the 1976. Take me back to the way it all ended. Tie game, overtime, and Darryl Sittler's the hero.
Well, the Czechs, I think at the start of the tournament, wouldn't have been one of the favorites to be in the finals. Everybody picked the Russians or the Swedes, right? Because they knew more of those players. But the Czechs, again, communist at the time with the Stasny, they had a great goalie in Zarilla. And he was one of those goalies that when you were coming down the wing, he would come out and challenge you almost to the bottom of the faceoff circle. So we had talked about in the dressing room, if you get that opportunity coming down, make sure you take a peek up because he might be right in front of you. And that's how it happened. I was on the ice with Lanny McDonald. He passed the puck up to Marcel Dion, great player, great centerman, threw it over to me. And somehow I went around the defenseman. He was charging out, and I looked up, and Zarilla's in front of me. Go to the side and put it in the empty net. And it was kind of, that was my greatest moment as a player, scoring and winning a winning goal and winning a championship. Obviously, I was, disappointing not to be on a Stanley Cup team in my career, but that Canada Cup team was as good as it gets. And one of the cool things after that, going back to Toronto, I mean, Lanny and I were on that team together. Our good friend, Mr. Ballard, had the receptionist who answered the phone there, the home of Darryl Sittler. So that's one of the nice memories I remember of Harold Ballard, which was awesome.
One of the nice memories. We're in conversation with Hockey Hall of Famer Darryl Sittler on the 7-Eleven Overtime podcast. That is one of, I'm telling you, Darryl, I've covered some incredible stories in the world of sport in my life. When I first met Harold Ballard, I was like, I can't believe this guy. I like, just in talking to him and seeing him and then watching things unfold, and no one got to see it firsthand more than you did. It's one of the strangest relationships I've ever seen in my life in all of sports, because we talk about love-hate relationships. Is that the way to describe your relationship with the former owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs? For those who don't know this, who aren't old enough, Harold Ballard, grumpy old man who lived in Maple Leaf Gardens, never was afraid to talk and was in front of everything. What was your relationship actually like with him?
Well, it started out, it was fine. And when Jim Gregory was the general manager, who obviously brought Borje in, and Lanny and Tiger and that whole group of guys, Roger Nielsen. Jim was he was a very mild-mannered guy, and he was in control of Harold. He'd keep a lot of that stuff off to the side. It was probably going on in the front office. But as Harold got older and, a little more whatever,
crankier,
crankier or whatever, he took the initiative all the time to create drama for no reason. So you media guys, when he'd come in, you don't know what he was going to say or how he was going to say it. And it became a frontline paper, and that would fire back to us guys and me as the captain of the team. I'd always kind of have to be the front guy to, to talk about it. And the Ingy Hammerstrand thing about going into the corner with 12 eggs coming out, none of them broken, that sort of stuff. The thing with women reporters coming in the dressing room. There were so many different issues.
Stuff he never would have gotten away with today. No chance.
No, totally not. And as a player and a captain of the team, our focus was to play hockey and do our job, right? And then you get distracted with that. And obviously the media want to build it up, the whole showdown issue, banning me from going on Hockey Night in Canada. There were so many different things. Imlach had a lot to do when he came. He was worse. When Harold hired Punch Imlach, and no disrespect for Punch winning the cups in the 50s, but now we had a players union. I was a vice president. I was a captain and no trade contract. So Imlach didn't like those things that I had that maybe had a little bit more power than any other player had with them. And I was a popular guy with the media, with the fans. And so I was his target. So in my mind, I had to do what I felt was right, the right thing to do. Sometimes it wasn't very nice. And sometimes it was aggravating in a battle, a lot of stress. But if I can look at myself in the mirror and do the right things for myself, for the team and everybody else, and the rest, is what it is, so to speak. You can't control that. So under those circumstances, it became a bigger thing. Imlach traded Lanny, traded Tiger, traded.
That was a bad part. I mean, don't skirt by that. When he traded away Lanny McDonald, that was a direct shot at you to say, I'll show you who's in charge, because he knew you two guys were really close together. I mean, that just seemed like one of the most spiteful things I've ever seen. He ships him off to Colorado, like at that point, a nothing team.
The day after Christmas.
Send a message to you.
Yeah, the day after Christmas, Boxing Day, Lanny's wife's 7 or 8 months pregnant. The family's in, and okay, I trade you, so to speak. But there were a lot of issues building up to that, and I don't want to get into them because it's a long story. It's the whole stuff I talked about.
Yeah.
But what happened there, and the timing was such that after Lanny was traded, it was a Saturday morning of a Leaf Hockey Night in Canada game, and I remember clearly saying to myself, why am I here? What's my job? My job's to play hockey. That's what I'm getting paid for. He doesn't want me to be a captain. There's no communication. There's no, cohesiveness there. I'm just going to take the C off. I'm just going to go do what I'm paid for. And I remember going home. My wife, Wendy, says to me, "Are you sure, Darryl?" I said, "No, this is what I feel. I've had 5-6 months of this, and I just want to go play hockey." So I wrote all the reasons why down, because I knew the media afterwards would be, it'd be unbelievable. And I went to the rink. Nobody knew about it. Came off the ice and went in the dressing room. I asked Gunnar Kinnear for a scalpel knife. Very emotionally, I'm in the washroom trying to take the C off as neatly as I could, and it was triple stitched, nervous. Yeah. So I asked Gunnar, I said, "Listen, without saying anybody, would you do this?" And then he did. And I went in to talk to the players. I talked to the coaches first, Floyd Smith and Dick Duff. And I talked to my team in a very emotional way, saying, "This is what I'm going to do," with the idea, the timing that, hey, the buzzer would ring and it'd be time to go on the ice, and away we go,
Yeah.
Well, what happened, and I don't think it's ever happened before or after, the Zamboni broke down. And I'm thinking in my headspace, Imlac's planted this thing so he can come down and tell me to take my jersey off, suspend me or whatever it was. That wasn't the case. So then after the game, obviously it became a huge story. And then that was on the Saturday. Sunday we had off. Monday morning, the Leafs come to me as if they're really nice, and they're going to allow my family and I to go to Florida for a week to have a nice vacation, And I said, I'm here to play hockey. I'm here to show you and everybody else. So I stuck to my guns on that, not to brag, but not that anybody would know. But the second half of that season, I was second to Gretzky in the scoring, right?
Oh, you were flying that year.
Yeah, everything was going well. Well, Imlac's answer to that was he was the guy to motivate me to be that way. I mean, that's kind of the man you're dealing with. So anyway, Imlac had a heart attack. Ballard never brought him back, and we moved on from the Imlac era. So,
and then you got into a scenario, and explain this one to me, because I got to be honest with you. When it was a short time after that where you came out in the press conference and all was patched up between yourself and Harold Ballard, and you guys had made friends, and you were, willing to wear the C again. And how did all that stuff come to play behind the scenes? Was that something you went to him and said, "Look, we need to," you mentioned it a couple minutes ago, you're the captain of the team. You're still the leader of this team. Everybody still looks up to you. You're still the points leader. You're still one of the best players in the NHL in that era. How did that unfold?
So what happened after Bunch Imlach had the heart attack? So I wasn't even being invited to training camp that summer. And then at the end of August, he had the heart attack. I had a meeting with Harold, and as only Harold could. He and I are in the hot stove. It's 7:00 in the morning, and
again, he lives in the gardens, so you're not going to meet anywhere else.
No.
He lived in the bunker.
So I mean, and you know him as well as anybody, but. So I'm in that meeting with him, and I said, "Harold, I just have one question." And he apologized. He said, "Darryl, it was a mistake for me to hire Punch." But he said, when I hired him as the owner, I had to back him up, so to speak, which I respect. So I said, "I have one question for you, Mr. Ballard. If Mr. Imlach recovers from his heart attack, are you going to have him back?" And this is true. Harold looks at me in the eye and said, "Darryl," he says, "I'll have him back. He can drive the Zamboni around a couple laps, but that's it." I think, holy shit. And so there's so many times in my career when incidents like that happen, there's many of them. I'm saying to myself, this is the Toronto Maple Leafs. This is the history. This is the tradition. I was fortunate in the 70s to be with George Armstrong, Dave Keon, who were there with the Teeter Kennedys before. So I had all this, still do today, this respect and this history and all that sort of stuff. And Harold kind of shattered that all in just the way he ran the organization, so to speak. But to get back to your question, so what happened when everything was resolved and back, I had, I think, 1 year left of my contract, and they had made a trade for Wilf Paymont. I was making, I don't know, 180 grand a year then or something. And new guys come in, and now they're making 250, 260 or whatever. And Jim Gregory had always said to me, "If you're the captain of the hockey club," he wanted me to be the highest paid guy, just out of respect, whether it's 5 grand more, which was, you didn't have to do that. Yeah. So I went to Harold Ballard, and he said, "Darryl, we'll sit down and we'll work that out." So that happened in, say, September. October went by, November. I could sense this feeling that he was stalling for a reason, right? Yeah. And and Alan Eagleson was my agent, so we were trying to push him a little bit. So he said, you call me at 2:00 this afternoon. And we had morning practice because they had a board meeting that morning. Okay. So I'm thinking, okay, he's got to go before the board. He's going to tell him what he's going to do. And so I called him at 2:00, and I was over at a restaurant across the street. Turnbull had a little restaurant with the idea. I waited, told him at 2:00, and I'm going to go up in his office and meet with him.
Yeah.
And this is what happened to me. So I'm there on the phone. The secretary puts me on to Harold Ballard. Exactly how it went. He says, Darryl, I had that meeting. He says, here's what I'll do for you. I'll trade you to any city you want to go to. And I thought, you bastard, you can tell me to my face even. I'm on a telephone. So I was ticked, eh? So
for sure you would be. The guy had promised you the cash, and instead he's saying he's trying to run you out of town.
Yeah, he said, I'll trade you, So now I go over there. Jerry McNamara is the GM, and I felt bad for Mac, okay? Yeah. And I go into his office, okay, this is what this jerk owner said to me. I'm out of here. I'm not friggin' playing, okay? If that's the disrespect I get, he goes, slow down. He didn't mean it. I said, listen. So the deal I had in my contract was a no trade, and I could kind of pick
a couple teams, right?
So I went home. And what happened, I went to the team doctor, and I went to my own independent doctor, and they knew everything in the history of what was going on that whole season. And they said, Darryl, you got to take some time off. You're going to have a nervous breakdown. Something's going to happen. Yeah. So I had that kind of as my backup thing. I didn't go to the next practice. I sat out. Media, Sittler goes AWOL, all this crap. My home surrounded with cameras and out front and all that sort of stuff. And then finally they came to the position where they made a deal with Philadelphia Flyers. So I was ready emotionally to move on and get out of there for my family's sake, for my career's sake. Yeah. And I kind of never looked back. I mean, I was so honored and proud when Cliff Fletcher, Steve Stavro was the owner, hired Cliff Fletcher, brought him into the organization. And Cliff, I've always known him, a classy guy, does Very things classy. The right way. When he called me up and he says, Darryl, I'd like you to be a part of our new management team. You come in, and we sat down. Now, I retired in 85. That was 1991. We didn't have a relationship. If you're an ex-Leaf player, if you wanted to go to a Leaf game, you bought your own tickets, you went there, nobody would, Harold didn't respect to have alumni or respect the past little players, So that all changed. I was a part of it. I've been a part of the organization since. We got a strong relationship with our management now, and the players appreciate it. The former players appreciate it, and management's appreciate it. It's a great partnership for all of us. And I remind everybody, each Leaf player today is going to be alumni someday. Whether you played 5 years or Austin Matthews might play 15 years. So alumni are important, and it takes management's effort and working together to make it all work for sure.
And what you accomplished during your career to get to the point for the recognition that you had. We're in conversation with the Hockey Hall of Famer Darryl Sittler on the 7-Eleven Overtime podcast. While there were some weird blips in your time, which were mostly owner driven with Harold Ballard in Toronto, you put together an amazing career. You ended up as one of the 100 greatest players in NHL history. That list came out, I think it was in 2003. They raised your number 27 to the rafters in the building, which is something that really is a pretty exclusive club. When stuff like that happens, when you get that kind of recognition, does it allow you to kind of put the other stuff aside and say, the politics is politics, the lousy ownership at times is lousy ownership, but at the end of the day, you put together one of the greatest NHL careers of all time?
Well, I appreciate your remarks here. One of the things, even to this day, I try to do the right things for the right reasons, and I share that with my kids every day. We all know what's right and what's wrong, and if it's right, try to do the right thing. You can lie to yourself. So I try to live my life that way. So going through all that Harold Ballard and Imlach stuff. When my career was over, and now I've got this new part of my life with Wendy and the kids. She was diagnosed with colon cancer at a young age. Our youngest one was off to university, and I was part of the organization at that time. And Ken Dryden was the president, and this was back in 2001, it was. And he phoned me. I'll always remember the day he phoned me. I was out in the deck with Wendy. She was taking chemo at the time. It was September 15th. And he said, we're going to honor you and Frank Mahovlich and put your two number 27s up together on the 75th anniversary opening night of the season, which was great. But I said to Ken, it's, Wendy's sick, and he knew that. I said, the timing might not work for that. He understood it. Anyway, I didn't participate in it. They put Frank's jersey up. Wendy died 3 days later, October the 6th, right?
So sorry.
So management said, Darryl, you pick a time when you're ready for it with your family emotionally. So I waited about a year and a half. I wanted to do it on a Saturday night when the Habs were playing the Leafs. As a kid, I was a Habs fan, and I knew, the significance of that. Beliveau was my childhood idol. And,
he was my idol, by the way, too.
Oh, so anyway, I'll tell you a Beliveau story in a minute, which is awesome. So anyway, so Ken respected that. So we were doing it on February the 8th, and about 3 or 4 weeks before, he called me and he showed me an artist rendering of what my banner might look like. And I said that, and while I was sitting there with Ken, I said, what would be really meaningful for me? I said, Wendy was such a part of my life for 30 years, married. She raised my kids. I was out there doing the things that you're talking about, having a successful career. Would you consider allowing me to put her name on the banner, right?
Oh man! And
I caught him totally off guard, and he said, "I don't know, Darryl." He says, "All those other guys are going to want their wives' names." I said, "This is a little different. This is, So he said, "Leave it with me," and I knew we had to go to the board and the ownership and stuff. So we came back a week later, and showed me a new artist rendering. And he said to me, "Here's what we'd like to do. We'll put her name on the blue lettering on the blue thing." He said, "You'll know it, your kids will know." I said, "No," I said, "it's important for me that people see it. It doesn't have to be big, but if it's going to be there, to me, that's just the respect I have for this thing."
Yeah.
So anyway, he knew the seriousness that I wanted that, convinced him to do it. So I don't know if you remember that ceremony. I'm out at center ice. I'm doing my little spiel. The banner's going up, and they zoom in on Wendy, and I said, "She's here." And that was my greatest moment to this day in my sporting career. You can talk about the 10-point game or Lanny McDonald against the Islanders or the Canada Cup, because that brought it all together. That was my career, my kids, my wife, and the Leaf fans playing the Habs. And I'll always remember that moment. And I'm grateful and thankful for the Leafs to do that. And Wendy's name is still there. And, I know it. And if they zoom in on it, the other people at home know it. That's the respect I have, Yeah.
That's awesome, Darryl. That's awesome. I remember when you were going through that. It was a rough time. It was a rough time. Darryl, you mentioned a couple of things a couple moments ago. First, the 10-point game, and I definitely need to ask you about that. But you also said you had a fun story you wanted to share about Jean Beliveau. What's that?
Well, when I was a kid growing up in the village of St. Jacobs, my dad and my brothers were Leaf fans, and I don't know, something I liked about the Habs, how they skated, and just listening to Danny Gallivan back then. And Jean Beliveau was my childhood idol. And under the Christmas tree, Santa Claus gave me this number 4 Habs jersey, and I'd wear that everywhere. I'd wear it to Sunday school. I'd wear it until I grew out of the thing, right? Yeah. So I get drafted by the Leafs in 1970, and I'm in the Montreal Forum, and I look up and I'm facing off against Jean. He's 41, his last season, and I'm 20. So a magical moment for me as a player. And then I go on and have a successful career. 89, I get elected to the Hockey Hall of Fame, which is a great honor. But from that point on, I get to see Jean Beliveau at some Hall of Fame events or golf tournament, still with the same magical goosebumps that I had when I was a kid. So when Wendy died of cancer, it was the morning of her funeral. I lived over in East Amherst, New York. My phone rings. It's about 10:30 in the morning, and I pick it up. He said, "Darryl, it's Mr. Jean Beliveau. I want you to know I'm thinking of you on your most difficult day of your life." And he went and found my number. It was important for him to call me and tell me. So when I hear, even to this day, people who knew Jean Beliveau, there's all sorts of stories that he tells like that. And it just gives me, inspires me more to do those little things that sometimes you have no idea the difference it's going to make in some people's lives. If you sit on the sidelines and do nothing, probably nothing's going to happen. But if you get out there and do a few of those things, you might see in the background here, I got my picture of Terry Fox hanging here. Yeah. There's not a time I don't go by that to think, here's a guy who's had such a tragedy in his life to lose his leg, but he's going to run 26 miles a day to across Canada to help you and I and anybody else who has cancer. And when Terry wanted to meet me, I wanted to meet him as much. And I went home and grabbed my All-Star jersey, put it in a bag. He had no idea it was coming. We just finished 26 miles downtown Toronto. And I walked into his room and I said, hey, would you like to go for a run? And I'll remember that moment for the rest of my life, as I will for Borje's, because the expression on his face, the two of us meeting each other for the first time, going down University Avenue into Nathan Phillips Square, getting to know Terry Fox personally from that day forward. To me, that his picture sits here. There's been $800 million. My grandkids, it's been 40 years ago. They're in the Terry Fox run. They have this understanding and knowing what type of person and the guy that he is. But the thing that stuck out most about Terry Fox that I think all of us can learn a lesson in his life is his humility. He was such a humble guy. It wasn't about him. It wasn't about whatever. It was about just trying to help other people. And his ego got out of the way, didn't have an ego. And to me, it's a reminder every time I go by that photo that maybe there's a few things I can do a little different, a little better, or remind me just to make that day a good day. So Terry Fox is my hero.
It was an unbelievable day. I'll tell you, Darryl, I was there at Nathan Phillips Square. It was packed. And to see you up there with your jersey and what Terry Fox was doing, it was like two incredible worlds of celebrity, of major achievement coming together. In like, I remember standing there and I was just a kid. I was like, this is nuts. This is crazy that this is going on. It was a
well, it's so wonderful that today that his dream, his marathon of hope continues on. Obviously it takes a lot of effort from a lot of volunteers, family members, corporate partners want to make it all keep happening, but it's a legacy that I was proud to be a part of and continue to be a part of, and I hope it lasts forever.
Hundreds of millions of dollars raised. Another pretty crazy moment was, and we got to mention this, February 7th, 1976, the Boston Bruins are coming into Toronto. They're 20 points ahead of the Leafs in the standings. Your Toronto Maple Leafs at that point, I think you had 1 win in 7 coming in. So everybody knew the Bruins were going to hand it to you that night. And Darryl Sittler has the single most offensively productive game in NHL history, a 10-point game, including 6 goals. What happened? Did you have any idea? Like, at what point did you realize this is out of control?
Well, to back it up before that weekend, talking about Harold Ballard, he'd made a comment to you guys, the media, if only he could find a center to play with Lanny and Errol. And I was the centerman. So obviously it's a shot under the bow at me, but that was standard. So I went to that game that morning, Saturday morning, skate, Maple Leaf Gardens, the same as any other game. But on the way home, I knew my wife wasn't going to be home, and I got stuck in traffic. I was behind something, and now it was getting close to 1 o'clock, and I knew I needed a nap, and I didn't want to make my own pregame. So I stopped in at Swiss Chalet and grabbed some chicken and some fries, and I remember eating them on the seat of my car, dipping it in. And so I go out and I go to the rink that night, and I get 10 points. I happen to mention on Hockey Night in Canada afterwards. So they sent me $500 worth of gift certificates from Swiss Chalet. Nice. Now, back then you could buy a lot of chicken for $500.
That's a lot of chicken.
Not so much now. But what happened, you're playing the Bruins. Obviously, it was a coast-to-coaster, and those are always special Saturday night, original 6 teams playing. And it just started out. We started scoring a few goals. And then at the end of the second period, I'd had 7 points, right? And Stan Obodiak, who you probably remember, was a statistician, and he came all the way down, come over to me. He says, Darryl, you've got 7, you get another one, you tie Rocket's record from the 40s, 8 points in a game. So that's when I first was aware that there was a record of 8 points. We went out in the third period, scored another 3. The last goal, if you see the video tape of it, I was behind the net. I was trying to pass the puck out in the slot to Errol Thompson, and Brad Park stuck his leg out, deflected it, went through Reese's legs, and I just kind of put my hands up. And, I don't know that at the time, it was a great record and a great game. We had to play the next night, so we didn't have a lot of time to celebrate it. And I didn't realize that this record, here you are 7 years later, is still a record day. I remember watching the games after I retired in the late 80s, early 90s, Wayne Gretzky, Marilyn Lemieux. They got 8 points a couple times, and there was always that, chance that they could score 10. Never happened, but I was proud to do it in a Leaf uniform for sure. Obviously, I think Borje had 6 points that night. Lanny had 4. I kid my buddy Tiger, who was here with me this weekend, he was -2. We won 11-4, and he was on for 2 goals against and none for. So I bug him. I said, "You're the only guy that didn't congratulate me. You were pouting in the corner." But those are the close ties we have with each other for sure. But it's a great talking about Harold Ballard again. Gave my family and I a beautiful antique tea service with a plaque on it with his name inscribed on it. And so those are all nice things that he continued to do for us.
Darryl, it's been a phenomenal journey. I've been so fortunate to be able to cover your, pretty much most of your career and to be able to share in some of these great moments with you. And it's so nice that we can still call each other friends. And it's been great reminiscing with these stories. Thank you so much for all that you've done for us on the hockey level, but even more importantly, what you've done away from the game. We really appreciate it.
Well, I got a lot of fond memories with you, Gino, and our friends at Special Olympics. We do that thing every year, have been doing it before hockey and all those other things. And, the time goes by and you say, where does it go? But that started 50 years ago too. So, and it's still going strong. And it's the young guys today, and even in your field, that have to keep it going for sure. It grabs to your heartstrings, as you know. And when it does, it's everybody's a winner for sure. Perfect. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Darryl. Be well, my friend.
Take care. See you soon. Bye-bye.
The Overtime Podcast is proudly presented by 7-Eleven. Before leaving the rink, order your favorite Slurpee fresh premium. The Overtime Podcast is proudly presented by 7-Eleven. Before leaving the rink, order your favorite Slurpee fresh 100% premium Arabica coffee, hot from the oven pizza and wings, pint of ice cream, or even a carton of milk, a dozen eggs, and a loaf of bread from the 7NOW app, and Team 7-Eleven will have your order ready for pickup 24/7. If you missed any parts of the show, don't worry. Visit our website at overtimepodcast.ca, where you can both listen and subscribe to future shows. 7-Eleven's Overtime Podcast can be found on the iHeartRadio app, Spotify, iTunes Podcasts, or any of your favorite podcast platforms. Until next week, I'm Gino Reda saying so long, hockey fans, and thanks for joining us on the 7-Eleven Overtime Podcast.